4 and 1/2, 5 and 1/2, 4, 4 and 1/2, 4 and 1/2, 3 and 1/2, 4 and 1/2. Mike, 103C, forward 1.5 tuck. Scores. 6, 6 and 1/2, 6, 5 and 1/2, 5 and 1/2, 5 and 1/2, 6. Jesse, 104C, forward, double somersault tuck. Scores. 4 and 1/2, 5 and 1/2, 4 and 1/2, 4, 4, 4 and 1/2, 5. Noah, 301B, reverse dive pike. Scores. 8, 7 and 1/2, 8, 8, 8, 8 and 1/2, 8 and 1/2. Jose, 401C, inward dive, tuck. Scores. 4, 4 and 1/2, 4, 4 and 1/2, 4, 4 and 1/2, 4. Jake, 402C, inward somersault tuck. Scores. 4 and 1/2, 5 and 1/2, 5, 5, 4 and 1/2, 5 and 1/2, 6. Brandon, 5211A, back dive, half twist straight. Scores. 5 and 1/2, 3 and 1/2, 4, 4 and 1/2, 3 and 1/2, 4, 6. Brendan, 203B, back 1.5 pike. Scores. 3, 3, 3 and 1/2, 3, 3, 3, 3 and 1/2. Cole, 204C, back double somersault, tuck. Scores. 2 and 1/2, 3 and 1/2, 4, 4, 2 and 1/2, 3, 3 and 1/2. Travis, 203B, back 1.5 pike. Scores. Eight, 7.5, 7.5, 6.5, 6.5, 6.5, 7.5. Stetson, 301C, reverse dive tuck. Scores. 3.5, 2.5. 3, 2, 2, 3, 2. Andrew, 203C, back 1.5 tuck. Scores. 2, 2.5, 2.5, 2.5, 2.5, 3, 3. Alexander, 401C, inward dive tuck. Scores. 6, 7, 7, 6.5, 7, 7, 6.5. Andre, 403C, inward 1.5 tuck. Scores. 6.5, 6, 6.5, 7, 6, 6.5, 5.5. Dustin, 401B, inward dive pike. Scores. 5.5, 6, 6, 5, 5, 6, 5. Aaron, 105C, forward 2.5 tuck. Scores. 5, 5.5, 5.5, 5.5. 6, 5.5, 5.5. Beginning round 5, Nikki, 103B, forward 1.5 pike. Scores.